Tensos momentos antes del inicio de la retransmisión en directo. Hola, buenas tardes. Muchas gracias por estar aquí. Muchas gracias, Michaela, por venir desde Australia hasta Málaga. Yo soy Patricia Soler y soy la directora coordinadora, digamos, del ciclo La Moda del Arte, que lleva 3-4 años celebrándose. O sea, lo organiza la Térmica, pero lo hacemos aquí en el Thyssen. Y bueno, los que nos habéis estado siguiendo ya sabéis que tenemos un elenco interesante de gente que viene, desde diseñadores, curadores de arte, directores de museos, artistas. Y hoy tenemos a Michaela. Michaela es un caso especial de un, digamos, por decir una palabra un poco extraña, viéndola a ella, pero un híbrido de diseño y arte, ¿no? Y bueno, esto es lo que, digamos, con esta ambivalencia que yo creo que la caracteriza, es también lo que intento que caracterice este ciclo, que ya tiene un nombre un poco extraño, como repito cada vez, y nunca tengo claro si escogí bien el nombre. La moda del arte, ¿no? ¿Es el arte una moda en sí mismo? Podríamos preguntar también, ¿no? Bueno, yo generalmente ya saben que hago presentaciones muy breves, pero es que esta vez será tan breve que no la voy a hacer, porque la va a hacer Michaela directamente, porque nos va a empezar a hablar de su trayectoria, de cómo empezó todo, ¿no? So, the first question for you, Michaela, thank you for coming from so far away. In fact, she's from Australia, but she came from London yesterday,
yes,
no?
Yeah.
Okay, I was just kidding. You just arrived from Australia.
Oh my gosh, no,
Well.
I would be exhausted.
Well, then tell us, how did it all started? How did you started working, and what was the progression from your beginnings to your current work?
Well, I started actually in fashion school. So I was learning how to make clothes and how to do collections. And that's really my background as a fashion designer. And then after graduating from fashion school, I moved to London and became a seamstress for young London brands. Before I started becoming also a tailor for celebrities and a costume designer. So really my entire background was fashion. But I think what was interesting is that even though I worked in fashion and I worked making clothes and tailoring clothes and with very much that intention, I always like to work as an artist. So I work very emotionally and everything is very connected to how I feel and I love to work very slowly and work on each piece one by one rather than in the fashion industry when it's churning out pieces for a collection every 6 months or every 3 months, depending. So yeah, my background is in fashion very much, and now I would see myself working as an artist and fashion designer.
You know, there's a number of fashion students here, no? From San Telmo. They usually come, so they are here, yeah. And it's interesting because you grew up in a fashion school, so to say, you've done all sorts of different things, no, around it, like seamstress. You've done, kind of the knack of the actual
of sewing, and I always say my craft is sewing, actually. I think I spend the longest time sewing, and I prepared a slide where you can see where obviously what I do is about the body, and it's about morphing the body and exposing the fat rolls and exposing everything that we've been told to hide, the boobs, the vagina, the I don't know, the cellulite, everything. But it's always coming from a very delicate standpoint, and that is usually what I try to achieve through my clothes. So you can see here, this is me. And I'm wearing a corset that I made that is very much constricting the body and really, really showing off the stomach. But then I like to see my clothes also as a work of art. And I like to create them as delicate as possible and for them to look as organic as possible, almost as if they're falling apart, as if they sort of have references to the body as well, so that they can really organically fit with the body and create these new structures, these new, shapes. Mm-hmm. So I forgot what your question was.
No, we're getting into it. But because, I mean, when in fashion school, you did 2 graduate collections which show very much the influences that it can be perceived in your work. Can you tell us about it? Like, for instance, the Victoria corset lacing and all that, no?
Yeah, so I did my first graduate collection was looking at Victorian culture and the corsetry in that culture and how children from such a young age, usually from about the age of 10, were forced to wear corsets in order to train their waist so that when they become adults, they're able to go really tight and go quite extreme. But in this way, it sort of started to sexualize children because wearing corsets meant that their bodies looked like adult bodies. It reshaped their bodies to take the appearance of adults. And I just found that dynamic really interesting.
Like
and there was a very innocence in the way, if you look at the way that Victorian children dress, it is very innocent. It's bows and frills and you know, dresses and everything, but they still wear corsetry, and there was this sexualization of children in this way. And I just found that very interesting from a cultural and societal point of view, and also from an aesthetic point of view as well.
But you actually started working on your own, no? Before you because you are now model, editor, designer. But you did start it. Tell us, how did you start it?
Sure. I actually have some slides on this a little bit further in the presentation that I can skip to.
No, whatever. So what's next for us?
No, I can skip to it.
This is lovely. This is
made
of.
You.
These are Swarovski bits, aren't they?
Yeah, this is like a Swarovski corset made fully of invisible tulle that is in the same way it's designed to sculpt the body, but the corset was an art piece on its own.
And this is recent work.
And this is recent work. This is work that I made in quarantine.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, in the first lockdown.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you have exhibited it.
I never exhibited it.
Yeah.
I was meant to, but then because of quarantine, we couldn't. So
why do you use globos? How you call that in balloons?
To show the form of the body, I think. Okay. To show the boobs, to hold the to hold the corset in shape. Also to sort of turn the corsets into works of art as well. Mm-hmm. Because like I said, each piece is made really slowly. I would take maybe a month to 2 months to make each piece. So in my mind, they were even more so the artwork than the pictures. Because if having knowledge about tailoring and pattern cutting and corset making, it's very difficult to make corsets that really shape the body and look this delicate. And so I don't know.
Did you actually take examples from Victorian corsetry? I mean, not only the aesthetics, but the actual way in which they did their corsets?
Yeah, I am inspired by that. Yeah, definitely. Obviously, my corsets are made a little bit differently because they're made to do the opposite of what traditional corsets would do. So where traditional corsets are designed to pull in the stomach, mine are designed to push the stomach outwards or allow the boob to flop right over. So I use really specific types of boning in different areas of the corset and waist tape as well to help me achieve this.
Mm-hmm. So what's next for us then?
So what's next? This is just another example of my art versus fashion, yeah. So my artist inspiration.
Yes.
Yes.
This is one of the questions I wanted to ask you. What are your artistic influences?
I would have to say Hans Bellmer is a huge artistic influence for me. I think looking at the work of Hans Bellmer, he makes these dolls where he completely restructures the body with the dolls and puts different pieces together in quite a creepy way. And he also used to do this sort of tying on his wife, who's pictured in these images, and I think it's quite obvious to see the similarities between my work and between Hans Bellmer's work.
But did you know Hans Bellmer before you?
No, I didn't.
Somebody pointed out
very early on. It was in the first images. Okay. But I think what's really interesting about the difference between my work and Hans Bellmer's work is the perspective that it comes from. So Hans Böhmer was doing it in the 30s, and he was doing it on his wife, and it feels quite objectifying and quite sexualized and quite distant from the subject as well, versus my work comes from a very, very personal perspective, and it's very much emotional and sensitive, and it's about liberating the person who's wearing my designs. Whereas I don't get that exact feeling from Hans Böhmer's work, although it could be liberating in its own way. It's a very different perspective, and I think that also is quite clear when you look at the distinctions between both of our works. Of course, Schiaparelli has to be a big inspiration for me. I think I'm inspired by the way that she references the body, especially in this skeleton dress, but also the sense of humor in her work. I think it's really important when you're discussing things about the body to keep, I don't know. For me, I like to keep it light and to keep it humorous, and a lot of the issues that I talk about in my work that are directly challenging the fashion industry and challenging the beauty ideals within the fashion industry, but also challenging the way the models are treated yeah, all these things. I think that it's important to come at it with a sense of humor because they're such serious topics, and it's for me and my community of models. I think that really gets us down a lot, and so to come at it with a sense of humor and to make clothes and imagery that still has that within it is quite nice, and that's what I like about Schiaparelli's work.
Good.
Yeah. And then Jenny Saville, of course, who references the body quite a lot. And John Cassar, who was a painter, American painter. I don't know, I think what I'm trying to get at with my sources of inspiration is that there is a lot of inspiration of artists that reference the body in quite a disturbing way and quite a really grotesque, overt sort of way. And then I also have these artists like John Cassar who reference the body in a very, very feminine and delicate and beautiful way. And I think that it's the combination of both is what helps you sort of be able to provoke in a meaningful way and to be able to really change people's perception of beauty and what the body should be. I think that, I mean, looking at work like John Cassar, it's not really like challenging beauty ideals at all, but it is undeniably, well, in my opinion, it's undeniably beautiful. And then looking at the work of Jenny Saville, it's a lot more rough. It does have a beauty in a way, but it's not something that, I don't know, it's not, sorry. It's, for me, I feel emotion running through it, but I don't see it as inspirational for myself to look like that in those images. And so my work really takes a blend of these inspiration. It takes a blend of the grotesque, of the overtly sexual, of the feminine, of the delicate, and it mashes those together in order to try to challenge beauty and to try to allow the viewer to second guess themselves, to look at the image and think, and immediately think that they're fascinated and that they're intrigued by the image because it is beautiful, but in some way it also challenges what they perceive as beauty. So then they start this internal dialogue in their own head, and they start to question why don't they find it beautiful, or why do they find it beautiful, and why do they feel uncomfortable by it? And then when you start to have this internal dialogue in your head, that's when you start to change your perceptions, because you're questioning yourself and you're questioning everything you've been taught. And that's really what I'm trying to achieve in my work. I'm trying to achieve the viewer being able to change their perception of beauty and change their perception of self as well.
Well, by the way, I didn't say this before, but we are going to have questions open to the public, so you can also ask questions or exchange these views on perceptions with Michaela.
And if you don't understand anything I say, because I'm a bit nervous, and when I get nervous, I speak fast. Yeah.
Se la entendéis bien? Se la entiende bien?
Okay.
And did you actually collaborated with Alexander McQueen?
No, I collaborated with Jean-Paul Gaultier.
Yeah, I know that. Yeah, but I thought there was also something with McQueen.
I did a residency at Saraband, which is the foundation of Alexander McQueen.
Okay, that's right.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So these are some of your sources of inspiration. You already mentioned Victorian women and the way in which they sexualize their children, all these artists and designers. But then, do you have something about what I was asking you before? How did you start working alone in your room? I'm very interested in that.
I do.
Okay.
Should we switch to that part of the slide?
No, whatever. What's next? Es que hay unos órdenes diferentes.
We're going backwards.
I'm going backwards? Sorry. Both of us.
And then I was going to say I'm also inspired by performance artists. Lee Barry, but also Dieter von Hees and Violet Chachki. Again, this dynamic between the ultra-feminine, ultra-beautiful, really intense body morphing and something more grotesque, but in the same sort of world. And I think you can see the similarities and differences between the two.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And this is your recent cover in Russian Vogue,
in Russian Vogue, yeah. So then I was going to talk about my career highlights.
Yes, good. This is your most recent career highlight.
So, I mean, yeah, the cover of Russian Vogue was kind of a big moment, I think. And I think what was amazing about this was that it was really bringing my artwork and what I wanted to say with my artwork into something that is ultimately fashion. Vogue is like the epitome of fashion. It's also the epitome of what we think of when we think of magazines that impose beauty ideals. Vogue is really, really up there. It has imposed a lot of the beauty ideals that we know today in the past. And so it was really cool to be able to do this with Vogue Russia and for them to recognize my artwork as something that does fit in fashion and to be using contemporary fashion labels and contemporary fashion collections in this way. I should note that I did this with photographer Leah Colombo. And then in each page, we used a series of different models that somehow challenge beauty ideals today. And we also were able to do things like this image of me and Sam here scissoring each other, which I think was quite fun, especially in the context of Russia, and how that's not really something that, like, being gay is not really something that's accepted there.
No.
So in a lot of ways in this editorial, we really, really, really went for it. We showed a lot of nudity. We showed a lot of different bodies. We showed a lot of different ways of seeing beauty while using fashion collections of right now, which was fun.
Can I go back just a second? You were during lunchtime. You were explaining us something very interesting. No, it's that some of the nudity that was allowed in the Russian Vogue was not allowed in Australia.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is supposedly more of a liberal country.
Yeah, that was funny because at the same time that I was doing Russian Vogue editorial, I was also doing an interview for Australian Vogue. And I just found it funny that in Australian Vogue, I wasn't allowed to show any nudity, and I definitely wasn't allowed to show my vagina as much as I begged. But in Russian Vogue, we showed everything. And I don't know. It was a funny, it's funny to think that some...
It's contradictory sometimes.
Things are contradictory.
Yeah. Vogue is an independent country somewhere.
Yeah.
Somehow, because also it was quite of a shock that it came on the same date of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, ¿no?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Claro,
definitely.
Haces una Vogue cover y resulta que ese día Rusia invade Ucrania, ¿no? O sea, you're an explosive. Make love, not war, no? Or make dresses, not war.
Absolutely.
Anyway, this is the exhibition.
And then I did an exhibition in Paris last year, which was crazy. And that, again, was the combination of art and fashion. That was me showing my garments as artworks hanging up around the wall, around the room, trying to show people in person how delicate the corsets can be.
This is the top you're wearing today.
That's the same top.
Yes, estaba a punto de ponérmelo yo. Sí, cada vez que hago una charla, I'm saying this in Spanish, me pongo algo del diseñador y esta vez digo, ostras, Michaela Stark, que me pongo. Se lo pedí ayer, que ya estaba aquí, ya me había olvidado. Pero no me caben, por la cabeza.
Oh, yeah. We were in the hotel lobby, like taking our tops off. Like, a dad was walking by with the kid. Did you see that?
No,
and like,
I didn't. I must say I'm wearing some underweight made in Malaga by Gisela. So this is Malaga made underwear.
Oh, that's nice.
Yes.
Show it off.
Okay. No, after you, later.
We'll do a performance later.
So what was the reception like of this exhibition in Paris?
It was amazing. It was great to have the support of people in Paris to do this. It was done at Trinxet in Paris, which is an exhibition space that's owned by Dover Street Market. And yeah, it was incredible to have the support of people there, and a lot of people came to see it, and I think that they enjoyed for the first time seeing my work offline, because I think that it's hard to see what the garments really look like online, and it's also hard to understand that the body can really look like that, and that you can morph it, and the way that I show it on my Instagram is the way that it looks in real life. And I did a performance there as well, and I think the reception was really amazing because it was the first time I ever really did something like that. Me, myself, I was nervous. I was shaking the entire performance. Like I'm nervous today. I'm nervous all the time. But my leg, my leg was shaking like uncontrollably.
You want me to tie you?
Yeah, I feel better when I'm tied. I was saying this. I can be naked all day, like on a photo shoot, completely like dressed like Winnie the Pooh, like with a shirt on and no pants. And I'm so fine. All day, like standing behind the photographer being like, yes, no, and then, but the minute I take off my corset, I feel exposed.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
So another thing in exhibiting is that there's no censorship like in social networks, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah. That's a big point, actually. The censorship in social networks is something that's, I think it's starting to change what art means today and the way that artists work today. Because when you're on a photo shoot, especially if it's for anything, you want to have the exposure and you want to be able to share your work. And Instagram is, for a lot of artists, the easiest way to do that. To spread a message, you need people to see it and you need to be able to start those conversations. And for Instagram to censor so heavily is making artists think about the work that they produce and before they even produce it. And artists are constantly feeling like they have to censor themselves in their raw art when they're putting the creativity into it in order for their message to be able to be shared. Oh, sorry. And I think that's really interesting and also such a shame because it means that with Instagram so readily available on our phones, that's how we seek artists and that's how we engage most of the time. Of course, we can go to museums, we can go to talks like we are at today, we can go to galleries, but the main way that we see these artists is through Instagram. And the main way, there's a lot of change being made through Instagram as well, and I just think that it's really impacting the way that we create nowadays, and it's really putting a strain on artists and I don't know, some days I feel like I don't want to create or I don't want to put anything out there or I want to just hide my Instagram and not create art for that anymore.
But you have your own web, no? You pixel things and then you can see them on your web.
No, absolutely. Yeah, tell me. Hey.
No sé si... un momento. En realidad para el streaming que se necesita un micro. No, because it doesn't go into the
Hi,
recording. Hi,
Michaela. Thank you for coming.
Well, thank you for coming.
Thank you too. Based on what you are saying, would you convince that artists, or at least a part of the production, given their relationship with Instagram has to be, so to speak, said or so to speak called as Insta-friendly, because myself as a photographer as well, I have to consider that like 95% of the time. Like I'm gonna do a shoot and I have to consider, hey, this part has gotta be Insta-friendly, because if not, like what you are showing, which parts you are showing, which parts not, because the moment you transgress one of the rules, you are just running into trouble. Okay?
Right.
So you just say that yeah, actually some part of what you do has to be like conditioned by that, isn't it?
Absolutely, and it's interesting because I think a lot of the censorship happens to people that are actively trying to challenge the way that we see the body and are trying to, or that we see sex or these topics that are considered so dangerous for our society. And the actual wording that they use is I think it's harmful for society or something like this. It's very intense. And so it's directly impacting the artists that are trying to make a change and that are trying to change the way that we see things. And it's meaning that they're the ones that are being censored, and so they're having such a hard time in creating works that's going to be seen without being censored, when the whole issue is the censorship, actually. And so it's a circle.
It's an eternal loop.
Absolutely. And then the other problem is that there's so many double standards with certain types of bodies, like, for example, with breasts that aren't allowed to be seen, but like male-born people with nipples, they're allowed to show those nipples.
You realize there's no censorship today here.
Sorry?
You realize there's no censorship?
Oh, never censorship for me.
No. So what are we seeing here?
So this is an image from the exhibition. This was taken by Solveig Sundsbo, who I collaborated with in the exhibition. And this was a huge moment for me, I think. Solveig's, I've worked with him before. He's a wonderful photographer to work with, because he, unlike a lot of, well, I don't want to say a lot, but unlike some photographers, he really, really listens to the person in the picture, and he listens to, we were able to have a very good dynamic back and forth about what should be shown in the images, listening to my voice as an artist as well. And I find that it has been difficult for me in the past to work with photographers when I'm putting so much of myself in the picture and I'm really getting vulnerable, because on a set I love to be as vulnerable as possible. I will be completely naked with my legs open, squeezing my boob, but I need to have that trust in the photographer that they're not going to exploit that. And I think that's a topic that we were going to talk about today.
Yeah, we are talking
about it today, now. But that's why I chose to collaborate with Solveig for my exhibition, because he allowed me that control, and it was really nice, and I think that it allowed us to sort of create images that, in my opinion, are some of the best I've done. Yeah.
It's the same exhibition.
This is the same exhibition, yeah. And this exhibition ultimately was about getting that control back on my body, because I had felt that I had started my career in isolation. This kind of work in isolation, alone, taking photos of myself, making the clothes, basically doing everything from start to finish, which meant that I was in total control of my body and my sexuality and the way that I was being presented. And it allowed me a lot of strength to be able to put the images out there that I do, because I knew that I loved them. And knowing that I loved them, it didn't matter so much how they were perceived at the end of the day. I had strength in them and I had power in them, and I was figuring myself out through those images. And then after quarantine, I sort of got thrust into the fashion industry, where it doesn't so much work like that. The way it works in the fashion industry is that the photographer or the magazine editor has a lot of the control over what gets published, and the talent in the image usually doesn't have so much control. And so for some of my collaborations, I was starting to feel like my art and my body was being taken away from me, and that I was giving all of my vulnerability to the camera and all of my vulnerability to a set. And then because of the way that the fashion industry works and how it has always worked, I wasn't allowed control after that. And it no longer became my image. It was somebody else's image, but it was of my naked boob. It was of my fat rolls. And that had a really big impact on me. That made me feel quite vulnerable and quite upset. And I wanted to fight it, and I sometimes did.
But this is very recent you're talking about, because this is where I wanted to get at earlier on, that I found it very interesting that you developed all these new images, so to say, these new looks that you're experimenting with as an artist on your own, using self-representation, totally on control, and you only left your kind of room of your own, so to say, and the picture and the self-representation of your own, to paraphrase Virginia Woolf, when you felt that this is what you really liked and that you felt comfortable with it and that you wanted to go out, no? Right. And then, as you explained, this somehow is taken away from you when you expose yourself to the fashion industry and this representation of our bodies. You feel, instead of being empowered, as you seem to hint when you were on your own, doing your own design, picture, pose, etc., as model, designer, photographer, then you feel disempowered, no? In the fashion industry. And this, after this, if you correct me if I'm wrong, if this involvement of yours with fashion industry, if it happens only after pandemic, we're talking about a year ago.
Right. So it's been a whirlwind.
It's been really a lot. She's done a lot. You've done a lot in very few.
If you look at the dates, almost all of these images were taken in the last 2 years. Yeah.
Okay.
So a lot.
Are you all together? Good.
More or less.
So, but I didn't want to interrupt you. But we talked about this thing earlier, and I thought it was very interesting that you keep on telling us about this feeling of sexualization, the relation between sexualization, empowerment, disempowerment. Do you see yourself as sexualizing these kind of images you produce?
In these images, I don't see myself so sexualized, but that's because it wasn't the intention of these images. Definitely in some of my images, I do sexualize myself. Mostly on my images that are found on my website, but not on my Instagram, because they're a little bit too much. But it was so empowering in that moment because it was me as the photographer. I think that you can see the difference between the work that I sexualize myself or the work that another photographer sexualizes themselves, because I feel, or that another photographer is sexualizing me. Because I think that my images are a little bit more grotesque and a little bit more monstrous and a little bit more raw, because I really was able to get into character and I was able to push it to the limit. And the way that I work is to film myself. So I move slowly, and maybe over 20 minutes to half an hour of filming myself, I've really started to get into my flesh and grab things and pull things and then get sexual and then check my face is looking cute and then do everything like this, and it gets quite raw. And I do love working with photographers, but it's usually quite more romantic than that in the way that they sexualize me. I was seeing that last night as I was putting the slides together. Again, it's a bit later in the slides, but yeah.
Let's go. Después hay preguntas. Okay. Después hay una sesión de preguntas.
What?
No. There's questions, and I think it's better if you present your work, and then we have questions from the public.
So then, I guess, kind of in response to this, I started thinking about performance art. Because in performance art, you're in total control of your body, and it's you there alone on a stage doing what you want to do and people absorbing that in the moment. And so that's what I did to open my exhibition in Paris. I did a performance where I cut up archive Gaultier pieces, specifically the cone bra from Madonna, and remade it into my own work. And the way that I did that was take on my process as an artist, because I think that that's a very performative process. So I set up a bedroom and I had mirrors everywhere. And as I said before, I was shaking uncontrollably. And I started by just simply getting undressed, and then started picking up Gaultier pieces and restyling them in a way that wasn't pre-planned. I had planned a little bit, but I obviously I couldn't cut up the cone bra, so I had to really improvise. And I just tried to get as much into my zone and element as possible, and start draping on the body, pulling things tight, like just be myself and be how I am when I'm alone. And I think that that was a really interesting step for me, specifically in the context of this exhibition that was all about taking control of my art and my body. And so that was the final product. Yeah, so that was cute. And then this was the this was the process images. So this was the part that I did sort of play around with. And I wanted to show that how it is really how I do it at home. I just take my camera and I just start wrapping my boobs and my stomach and playing around with different shapes and getting inspired by the way that my boobs can move or morph or, yeah.
You know, one of the influences you also mentioned was the feedy cam girls. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Oh, yeah, sure. So it's actually an inspiration that I've always been inspired by, but I've never talked about it.
Huh?
So here we are.
Here we are.
I'm also was initially inspired by, I don't know if you guys are aware of them, they're like feedy cam girls. I don't know, I stumbled across them.
You'll have to explain what feedy cam girls are.
They're girls that eat, like, it's a thing about eating for the pleasure of the person that's watching you, and then slowly growing and gaining weight and sexualizing that fat. I really struggled with that idea a lot because I wasn't sure what the power dynamics were in that you're feeding someone and then sexualizing their fat as they grow bigger. But there was definitely something interesting about the girls that stayed really in control of it, and they did sort of sexualize their own fat on camera and fed themselves, and I don't know, the shapes that they made and the way that they moved on camera, and the way that they really were so confident in their fat and so confident in their bodies, to the point where they're willing to use it to pleasure the viewer. I just found it so interesting and so inspiring because it was so different to what I was used to. I really grew up in a bikini culture where fat was very much looked down upon, and it definitely was not something sexual. And it was something that you should hide away, and eating is something that you shouldn't do publicly. And so to find out that there was a whole subculture of people that really saw that differently, of viewers and of participants, people feeding themselves, I just found it so interesting that there's just so many dynamics to the human body and so many different levels of attraction to the human body and so many different ways that people feel about themselves and so many different things that people want to expose sexually or not sexually. And I think that that was one of my biggest sources of inspiration because it opened my eyes up to everyone's different perspective on it, and that it's not just all about being thin or all about maintaining a certain shape. Yeah.
But you also tell us about, you were telling me about what you think about, are there differences between female and male photographers when they shoot you? Do you perceive that?
Yeah, what you asked me was about the feminine gaze and the masculine gaze. And I found this, people keep on asking me about this, and I find that question really interesting because I think that there's a perception that female photographers inherently have a feminine gaze and that they're going to be more sensitive to the subject. But it's not really how I see it, and in my experience with working with photographers, I think that there's two types of people or two types of ways of doing photography, in that you can have a feminine gaze which is maybe more sensitive and more about the emotions of the subject and really drawing the viewer in through yeah, the emotions of the subject, and yeah, it's a lot more emotional. And then there's the male gaze, which to me seems a lot more objectifying, and it's about showing the model from an outsider perspective and for the viewer to look onto it, objectifying that model and not feeling sympathy towards that model. But I don't think that those two gazes are necessarily inherently male or female. I think that I have worked with many male photographers that are able to have that sensitivity and are able to make me feel emotional in my images and connected to the person that I see in the picture. Mm-hmm. And vice versa. I've worked with female photographers that have really objectified me and that I haven't been able to recognize myself as a subject in the picture. I feel like something completely different. And to me, the best photographer is able to do both. So the best photographer is able to objectify the person in the image, whilst also maintaining that level of emotion and respect and sensitivity to the subject. Yeah. So
yes. You want to show a picture, or shall I continue asking questions? Is there something?
Either way, I was going to show this because this was my first ever picture I ever did of the body morphing. This was me alone in my bedroom just playing with some cut-up bras from Primark and stockings and shapewear. And I thought it was interesting to show this, how the shape in it is very strong and you can really start to see the development of the designs. And I wanted to show how then I got from this shape, from this sort of more artwork, into creating designs through it. So it usually starts with me morphing the body with some sort of cloth, something that isn't fashion at all, and really being able to shape my body so that I can change my perception on it and so that I can see it almost as an outsider and see the beauty in it rather than judge it how I would judge myself looking in the mirror. So once I get that sort of image and once I've played around with that for hours, then I can start to sketch on top of myself because I can then get inspired for the garments and how to create that sort of silhouette with fashion. And then you can see this is sort of the end result of that little experiment, which is one of the garments that I showed in the initial slides. And this is a corset. So it sort of takes those levels. And so this is what I was trying to say before, that I work as an artist and a designer. It's very much switching between the two to be able to create an image and a garment at the end that really sits between the art and the fashion world. And I mean, in this way, I'm inspired by the couturiers, you know, McQueen, Jean-Paul Gaultier, Terry Mugler, who also, in my opinion, did this, really blended the art and the fashion world and made these really exquisite, beautiful, delicate garments, but then presented them in a way that's very artistic and is very much making a comment about something, or like a comment about, I don't know, fighting for something in a very artistic way. And so I think in the end of the day, in this sort of way of working, there isn't much difference between fashion and art. And fashion can very much sit within the frameworks of art. It just depends the perspective on it. Because obviously ready-to-wear fashion houses is something very different.
So we also talked about this, which I think it's very interesting what you were saying, related to what you just pointed out, that it's that sometimes to be subversive of the normative images, one has to use or replay the same fashion codes or visual codes that we use to identify as beautiful.
Absolutely. And that's what we were talking about earlier. I think in order to change people's perspective, and I did touch on this before, but to change people's perspective on beauty and to sort of continue in that conversation, you have to be able to still use the same beauty codes that already exist. Because to make something that is just ugly and it's just, it's too much and it's just throwing ugliness in your face, to me that's not going to challenge actual beauty ideals, because the viewer is going to look at that and then think, well, that's ugly, and turn away. Versus if you, and you can see in a lot of my work, I do have this very hourglass figure, Venus-esque figure that I create with the corsetry, which is small waist, rounded hips, rounded belly, and bigger bust. And I use that to challenge this ideal. And I think that that's interesting in using beauty to challenge beauty.
Mm-hmm. One thing that you do that it's not usually in classic art is that you don't shave. So you see body hair. In women's naked bodies, usually this is completely hidden. You cannot see body hair, but you do show it.
I definitely do show it. And I have a slide here, actually. This is of my friend Robert, who was modeling for me. And I just wanted to put this in here because I wanted to show how feminine body hair can actually be, and how body hair is this interesting thing that it's been labeled as something so masculine or something quite gross or something that women shouldn't have. But it can be, in my opinion, very delicate and very feminine and quite ethereal. And I wanted to show these images of Robert next to images of me with body hair as well, and how there really isn't that much difference in the way that we look in terms of looking very feminine and quite ethereal in these images, and even though the placement of our body hair is in quite different places. Yeah, and so I think it's interesting to show it in a different way, in a delicate way, in an ethereal way, in order to break those molds and I don't know.
Another thing that sometimes it is obviously a way in which you break is that some people, I show the pictures before bringing Michaela here to several friends that did not know her work. So when they saw the work, a number of them said, "Oh, but this is a prosthesis. She's making herself a belly, but that it's a fake." And I had to convince them. No, but it was funny. I think I told you before, but I was explaining this to a friend, and I was going like this in a restaurant, saying, "No, if you go like that, then it will see. You know, you will go." And suddenly I realized there was all the people in the restaurant was looking at me. Because I was just doing these kind of things in the restaurant. So, do you encounter this, that people comes to you, or say people do not recognize it as a real body being morphed?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think people think it's photoshopped, or some people think I'm pregnant, or like I've heard people say, "Why the hell would you make this for a pregnant woman? Like, that's just going to kill the baby," and like getting really, really angry about it, which I think is quite funny. But yeah, definitely people think it's fake, which I think, as I like to get more extreme and as my art is growing, it started quite soft, actually. And this is one of the first images of my career as well, and it is quite soft, the way that I'm morphing the body. It's not painful at all. But now, as I'm starting to get really into it, and I'm starting to really develop my craft and develop my garment making as well, it is starting to get much more intense, and the corsetry is starting to be able to really shape the body in a very surreal way. So I want to do more performance art, I think, because I think that an image can only take it so far, but to see it in the flesh is a whole different experience.
So you just pointed to a question I wanted to ask you also. Does it hurt?
Oh, yeah. I mean, okay, that's a bad answer. This doesn't hurt. What I'm wearing today doesn't hurt.
Okay.
But like I said, now that I'm getting more intense, I know my limits on a corset, and I know how small I can make my waist while still breathing. And I will go there on a shoot, even if the shoot is 16 hours long and I have to wear the same corset all day, I will tighten it as hard as it goes. And then when I get in front of the camera, I will crunch my body and twist it and yank my boob and yank my fat. And sometimes I have to hold it in a pose for like 10 minutes. And then the photographer will say stop, and the hair and makeup, I don't know if any of you have experience with modeling, but basically when the photographer pauses, the hair and makeup just swarm on you and they just start touching you. And in my case, I work with a makeup artist, Kevin Cordo, who's a very close friend of mine, and he does the makeup head to toe. So he'll come and start putting pearls in my pussy or putting things on my boobs, and I just have to stand there and I'm shaking like a lot. In those moments, it hurts. I actually almost fainted once. But I think that I don't know what it says about my craft, but I think that as an artist, there's such a satisfaction in feeling pain for your art and to really experience that and to really throw your body into something that is very, very real, and the pain is very real, and then to see the beautiful imagery that comes out of that and how surreal that looks. It's just so satisfying. So I don't know why I do it, but I like it.
So when you work with other models, do you enroll them in this kind of, they know what they are setting themselves up to?
Oh, yeah. So that's a big factor for me. So I work with other models. I'll only work with other models that I know are 100%, they love my work. They have to know what my work is and be willing to put their body through that before I will agree to work with them. And they also have to understand the essence of my brand, because my brand is me. It came out of my own body dysmorphia. It came out of the way that, the uncomfortableness that I feel. And so I love to work with models that understand that, but they can also bring something themselves to it, and they can bring in their own experiences and their own relationship with their body, whilst willing to, tighten the corset or expose the fat. And I think in the fact that it can be quite painful, it means that I have had to grow extra sensitive with the models that I use. I have to do fittings with them, 2 preferably, before the shoot, to know that they're feeling comfortable with the garments. And I have to, on the set, make sure that they're feeling okay the whole way through, and that if there's any moment that they are uncomfortable, that they know that they can take the corset off and have a break. And I think that in this way...
You're slightly too close.
Sorry. Okay. I think that in this way, it's made me realize really how badly models can be treated in the industry, and how regular it is for a model to turn up on set, specifically a plus-size model, and for clothes not to fit them. And because the clothes don't fit them, plus-size models so often have to go completely naked on a set, like they're expected to be comfortable with that, or something is really quickly draped on them. And I mean, this is a big talk to get into, but the way that the industry treats these models of diversity, not just plus size, but any model that is there using their body to promote diversity, I think that it's really harsh on them. And you've had this experience before because you were a model as well. Yes. And it's very intense.
I have written about it, and I have made questionnaires with a number of ex-models.
Right.
Usually working models don't want to talk about their work because they risk they are being fired if they complain. But then ex-models, they do talk. And you get upset with photographers. You started pointing this out, no? That you had fights with photographers. Is that right?
Yeah.
Tell us about this.
Yeah, I mean, I've been on sort of shoots before where I'll be willing to be naked on a set, and someone will snap a picture of me behind the scenes, then upload the picture of me with my legs spread wide open and a tiny emoji just basically covering the inside of my vagina. And for that to be okay, an accepted thing within the fashion community, for the models to not have full control over their bodies and what they're doing on set and what's going to be exposed.
But it's basically the other way around. When you're a model, you're like a puppet in the service of whatever you're selling, whether it's clothes or a perfume. You are coming from another point of view.
I don't think so. I think that the way that the modeling industry has completely changed and flipped on its head. I think that there are still industry models that are still very much seen as that, and they see themselves as that. Mm-hmm. But then now there's this whole new wave of models that's come from Instagram. Mm-hmm. and they have their own platforms. They're fighting for their own causes. They have their own fan base. They have their own aesthetic. They basically are personalities or artists in their own right, and they're hired for that reason. They're hired for the publicity that they're going to be able to bring to the shoot. And so then they're brought on a set, and they're not listened to. They're told what to wear. They have, like I said before, have no control over the final product. They don't own the images. And once the photographer takes a picture of you, they can publish it in the magazine, and that's it. Mm-hmm. So, what am I trying to say? So I think that the industry hasn't caught up to the way that the model industry and the fashion industry has changed with Instagram. Sometimes it's literally the model that is the star of the shoot, yet they have no control over how the final images are gonna look. And it can really affect their branding or their self-confidence. And it's so backwards, and I think it's quite a misogynistic way, because the photographer in the past was inherently male, saying that they are the only artist on the set. It sounds like I hate photographers, I don't, but I just had some bad experiences. But I just don't think that they're the only artists on the set, and these days the artist can be anyone. It can be the model, it can be the makeup artist, it can be the stylist. Anyone could be the star of that set. It's not just the photographer, and I think that the laws around image rights and image ownership should be changed to accommodate to that.
Well, it's changing slowly, but I mean, there's a union in the United States, I forgot their name, which is gathering together, ex-models gathered together with a law faculty in the East Coast, and they are starting to fight for rights, because often models are underaged girls or boys, so and they are there not being completely unprotected, unlike actor girls and actresses underage, which have a lot of laws protecting them. No, it's not the case with models, but it is very difficult because it's a very predating industry, and as you say, they completely overtake you. Of course, you're coming from a different direction, you're expecting a different behavior, and you are an activist yourself. I mean, not only in the way in which you're kind of self-possessed of your own image, but also in all what you've been telling us, about setting up these different ways of seeing beauty, and you've experienced yourself also this idea that the bras that fit you are not the nice ones, so you want to have nice clothes for your own body shape, no? Yeah. So you're part of a movement, and it's interesting to see how this is going to have a real impact in the industry, because many of the supermodels of nowadays are still very much the standard beauty type.
Absolutely, yeah. And I have been noticing that still the top supermodels of today are still very much fit into the conventional beauty standards, and that there's only one or two high fashion models that really don't. Yeah.
Well, you're very much of a different case yourself. And do you want to show us more pictures, or shall we open the floor to the public?
Let's open the floor to the public.
Let's open the floor. Micro, por favor.
If there are any questions.
Seguro que hay questions. Sí, aquí había una pedida. ¿Hay alguna más? Pues hay otra ya. Pero si os parece, empezamos por allí, porque como has tenido una, vale. Y ya está. Y luego vamos a ti y ir pensando en preguntas.
Hi. First and foremost, thank you very much for expressing yourself and opening yourself up. I think it's you and how you are. Maybe it's a too personal question, and please feel free not to answer this, but I was wondering, since you started your process within COVID time, how has your self-image of your own body changed? And feel free not to answer it if it's
no, it's fine. I think that in a big way, the way that I see my body has changed a lot. Because the way that I started taking these images was just, like I said, videoing myself. So I would put my phone or my MacBook on selfie mode and literally sometimes just roll around the floor naked, like with balloons or something. And it made me really have to see my body from an objective point of view, and really have to understand the way that my body works and the way that my fat is distributed. And so that helped a lot with my self-acceptance, because I really got to understand myself. And the same with making clothes on myself. I just had to be able to look at myself objectively. And then my self-image got tested when I really went into the fashion industry and started working on sets and on shoots, because, like I said, I didn't have so much control over the images, but I still had to be able to look at myself objectively and be able to look at what the image was actually given, rather than like how I felt about myself in that picture. And so it's been a really big push and pull, because on one hand, I've come to really accept my fat, and I've come to really accept all the things that used to make me feel so insecure. And I don't feel insecure walking on the street now if one boob just flies out, or if, like, I don't know, I'm sitting down and I have belly rolls, whereas that used to cripple me. But I think I've gained a whole different understanding of myself, and I think that in a way I feel in less control of my body, and I feel sometimes I have to justify how my body looks even if I have no control over it. And that has made me feel insecure in its own way. So it's, I don't know, it's an evolving process. But ultimately I feel more comfortable in myself, 100%, yeah.
Can I say, si queréis hacer una pregunta, no estáis seguros de cómo hacerla en inglés, hacedla en castellano, yo la traduzco, que no os corte esto. Había una pregunta aquí delante, si no hay más de momento. Una aquí. Aquí está.
Hi, so my question is, to what degree did you manage to overcome these power dynamics you have described that are inherent to not actually being an author of your own images? Okay, I mean, like at the very moment you started to work for magazines, you have stated that the editor was the person actually in control of everything. Have you managed to, at least to some degree, to overcome that situation?
Definitely. Definitely. I think that as my practice has become more in the public eye, and I've gained more recognition through it, people have started to understand my perspective more. And the more that I work with photographers now, the more that they understand what is my work and what is my art, and then how we can collaborate. And it also comes with me having to understand what their artwork is as well, because I have to remember that I'm not the only artist on the set. And I think that that's really difficult when the subject is so vulnerable, but it's also very important. But my objective is to slowly change the industry over time. It isn't just to start strong and make enemies, which I don't think is very smart. So I think I've had to suck up a lot, and I've had to have a lot of moments where I just lock myself in my room and I cry and I do my own picture in a way of being like, I'll show them or something. But I think slowly educating people and talking about it and having these conversations is what's going to make change. And then being able to, when you're the head of the set and when you're the one that is in control, implement those changes and treat your models with respect and that kind of thing. So it is starting to slowly change as people are sort of starting to get to know me, but so it's difficult.
You could say that, so to speak, slowly, at a slow pace, you are managing to get your boundaries respected.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Just one last question, promise. You have also mentioned during this, well, I would refer to that as rigging, when you are rigging yourself, okay? And that comes to case because I find similarities with the practice of shibari.
Right.
You might have listened about it, and in particular, I have been in touch with certain practitioners that do this practice, but it's with themselves. Okay, I mean they rig themselves. So I have I have found a lot of similarities with your work and with that.
Right.
So I don't know, have you by any chance been or felt yourself influenced by that, or I don't know?
A little bit. It's funny you mentioned that because I actually had my first shibari session ever last week with a shibari artist that I've been wanting to work with for ages, Marie Sauvage, who's based sort of between Florence and Paris usually.
Great.
And I don't know so much about shibari, but then doing that session with her, it was insane because we really were like-minded, and the way that she was wrapping my body, it was like the way that I wrap my body with ribbons, but of course she has a certain art form to it, as she's an artist in her own right, and shibari is an art form. But it was so similar, and it did have a lot of the same connotations, and we really, really got on together as artists, morphing the body and wrapping it. It was just funny when she was sort of being like, can I go tighter? Can I go tighter? And I was like, I don't feel anything. And she was like, oh my God. I was like, and then it was in me being like, tighter. But yeah.
And it also comes to mind precisely because that's something what you're doing in this scene with fashion. It also comes to mind with this person that rigs themselves because they are, so to speak, also bypassing these power structures of this male rigger tying female persons, okay? I mean, it's a cliche we have associated with that, and slowly in these last years, that's also have been subverted. So I find fascinating that these things are actually happening at the same time.
Right.
So yeah, well, basically just to, if you haven't have a look at this kind of work of female riggers, so that I strongly suggest you to have a look at that.
Amazing. Yeah, I will. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Sí, hay una pregunta aquí delante. Sí, claro. She's asking in Spanish and I translate.
Okay.
A mí, bueno, estoy fascinada, aunque ya habíamos hablado antes, pues ahora todo lo que has contado. A mí me fascina cuando hablas tú de esa vulnerabilidad, cuando habitas, ¿no?, tu cuerpo. Patri, espero, voy contando.
No. No, claro, tengo que traducir. No, eso estaba ya pensando. That she's fascinated by this vulnerability in which you inhabit your own body. Okay?
Sí, y has trabajado con otros cuerpos, ¿no? Otros cuerpos a los que has metido en esa acción. Pero yo creo que esos cuerpos no han llegado a expresar eso que tú expresas porque es tu propio cuerpo, ¿no? Me gusta mucho cómo llevas al límite.
These other bodies that you work with don't express the same that you do because you put your own limits.
Claro, porque yo, por lo que has contado, creo que hay un punto en el que tú llegas a un sitio y seguro que eso lleva un tiempo, ¿no? De soltar ese cuerpo, de habitar ese momento y...
To inhabit that moment and to let that body go.
Creo que eso lo consigues tú y no otros cuerpos a los que tú llevas ahí, ¿o tú crees que sí?
Okay. She has the impression that you reach this point yourself, but not the other people, the other models you work with. Do you have the impression that they reach the same point that you do when you work with other models?
I think some models yes and some models no. I think I showed this image before of model Robert George Saunders, who's a close and personal friend of mine. And I think they've expressed that they loved wearing my clothes. It made them feel very feminine and really helped them with their body dysmorphia, is what they said to me. And I think that you can see that in the imagery, even though it's just of the torso. But I think that you can see that Robert let me pull their body to like an extreme as well, and then further crunched into the pose and allowed the garments to really reshape them, which was really enjoyable for me to work with someone like Robert in that way, to work with someone that was getting the same pleasure out of the clothes that I get, because it is something very intimate, and I know that that's not something that a model is always going to feel in my clothing. And then there's been other occasions where I've worked with models that maybe I wasn't so close with, that didn't embody it necessarily, But I think that that's okay, because I think that there is definitely space for those models as well. They embody something different in my work, and they are getting out of it what they want to get out of it. And I always try to build this relationship with them on a set so that they are getting something out of it and that they are loving what they're wearing and how they're feeling. So maybe they don't always push themselves to the extreme that I push myself, but it's because it's my art. It comes from my soul. It's very honest, and you can't always expect someone, I don't know. Yeah.
Another question.
Hola. Hi, Michaela.
Hi.
I'm very glad that you are here and you are doing something completely different. It's so refreshing to see somebody who dares to follow your soul, to follow your art, and it makes others to do and follow the same way. And yours is a big jump. No, I must say that. It's not everybody would have done that. So I'm really, really proud.
Oh,
to have
thank
met
you.
you.
Yeah?
And you're lovely.
Oh, thank you.
Are there more questions? I have a question in case there's no more yet. Can I ask you if you're thinking of commercializing your designs?
Yeah, this is a commercial piece, actually.
Ah, okay.
I just
didn't
don't
know.
have any money to put it in production. But
can it be made to order?
yeah, it can be made to order. And I actually am working on bringing out an e-commerce store where I'm selling corsets. So this corset here that Robert's wearing, I'm going to sell that shape, but in a different style. And an updated version of this shape as well, which is kind of my more iconic shape. So I'm going to start selling corsetry and see how it goes, because I'm not sure if people actually want to wear my pieces or if they enjoy seeing it in art. It's going to be interesting to see how. But yeah, definitely I'm working on commercial pieces.
Actually, there's Alicia Framis, who is an artist that works with dresses, came here and she was telling us how difficult it is to sell this type of work related to clothing, because so many collectors don't perceive it as contemporary art, even though it is, and it's growing more because more artists are becoming interested and doing really special things. Actually, this has happened for decades, but it's coming more and more. So there are also collectors that would be interested. As
cool.
See,
put me in touch.
I was asking. No, I mean I don't know any collector, but she was telling us but I mean it's my intuition, because I see the artists coming up with more and more interesting and daring things. No, but of course the commercial aspect I was also interested, because thinking, as you said, are they going to wear it? Is it commercial in the sense of wearing it, or is it commercial in the sense of collecting it to display and to watch as a piece of art?
I think there are a lot of ways that you can commercialize it. Like this whole idea of feeling uncomfortable and your boobs slipping out when you're running for the bus, or these kinds of things, that was a big inspiration for my sort of clothing. I think you could do that in a much more delicate, and I've already have designs for it. Again, I just need the money to do it. Wow. But there's ways to make clothes that make that okay. So I did make a pair of little like bloomers that are cut so that they go high on the hips, but then they frame the stomach. And so really your stomach looks bigger in them, but that's the whole point of the bloomers. And I gave them to a friend of mine to put on, and her reaction shocked me, because she was like, wow, I feel like my stomach looks big in this, but I love it, and usually I try to hide it.
Yes, it's true.
And so there is a way to make clothing that's specifically made for those parts that we feel insecure about, and without those parts, the clothing wouldn't look as good. And in that way, that could be a commercial avenue for me to go down.
You mean like therapeutic pieces of work? Therapeutic. You think you have a belly? Put these bloomers on, and
you'll have a belly.
You'll have a belly, and you love it. No?
Exactly. Yeah.
Or I mean, like asymmetric, non-symmetric boobs, for instance, breasts. No?
Exactly. So clothes that sort of like work with that rather than trying to go against that, so it makes you feel more comfortable.
Well, here comes ideas.
No one steal them, please. Oh my God. At least I have it on camera, so if someone does,
Sorry?
I can get them. Don't worry.
More questions? Sí, aquí hay una.
Hello, thank you, Michaela, for coming. You think the fashion industry the perspective of the fashion industry need to change by the designer? Because every time I see a plus size model on the runway, like Precious Lee or Paloma Slesser, they wear big clothes or long dresses, but they don't wear fitted clothes like other brand, like that thing in the beauty of the body, like the pizza.
Yeah, definitely. I actually just wrote an essay on this for British Vogue, talking about that exact same thing. And I even mentioned Pizza as well, because I think they do a really amazing job at making garments for different bodies. What I talked about was designers, typically they make clothes for a slim body because it's cheaper and it's easier. The minute you start having curves, the minute you start having anything that's not straight up and down, the more expensive and the more difficult it is to make something that's fitted. And because when you start gaining weight, you start gaining weight in different areas. So a size 42 could be like, two different size 42s could be two different complete body shapes. And so it's expensive for designers to really consider that and to design for that. But what I talked about in the essay is that young designers are doing it. So Pizza is one of them. Sinead Dwyer, which is a London brand, is another one. And I think that what they're doing is considering different body shapes in each garment that they create. So maybe you can't create, I haven't actually spoken to them, so this is just what I assume that they're doing, but if it's not what they're doing, it's what I suggest other brands do. You can't create, or it's very difficult to create one garment that's going to look amazing on everyone, and I think that we shouldn't expect designers to do that. But I think what we should do is start designing collections where each garment that you design is for a different body shape. And then you can size that accordingly for that body shape. So maybe it's for someone with bigger boobs, smaller waist, bigger hips, or maybe it's for someone that's flat on the top with bigger hips, or someone that's for more straight up and down. And different sizes and all of that. And in that way, it can become more inclusive, because then people are going to be able to start to relate to collections, and they're going to start to be able to actually buy fitted clothing that fits them, rather than feeling like a squished sausage, like in this picture right here. And I think another thing that's interesting that I just found out is, I don't want to name names, but some designers, big major designers, that do put the plus size models in fitted clothes don't even sell that size clothing. So they make that specifically for that model, they fit it on that model, and then that size is not even available in the stores. So they're literally just doing it for the publicity, which I think is really interesting, and it's a shame because it shows that they can do it. So I don't understand why they don't commercialize that.
Well, because you mentioned already, because it's easier
Because it's
to
expensive.
mass produce. It's easier.
Yeah.
You have standard sizes with standard bodies. This starts in pret-a-porter after.
It's awful. And another
the
thing,
60s.
well, I was working for a lingerie company last year on commercial lingerie. And the factory had such an issue with me trying to make a sample that was not for a size 34B, which is their standard sizing. They said to me that I'm inexperienced, I have no idea what I'm talking about, and the fashion industry simply doesn't make samples for different sizes. That's just not how it's done. And they tried to get me fired from my job. Which is really interesting, and it shows that these issues aren't even just the designers. It stems back to the roots of the industry, and it stems back to the factories and the manufacturers and everything. It's prejudice, but it's also laziness, and it's also cheapness, and it's a lot of bad things all in one.
Well,
Yeah.
I think one more question.
The brand that you talk about is the brand that Paloma wear on an ID cover.
Yeah.
It's Miu Miu. And they
You said it.
Oops. It's because they put that clothes on Paloma to focus on the mini skirt that are the new trend now, but they don't want to blue size people wear the mini skirt, and I don't understand this theme on the why you put this mini skirt that is custom, that is not on sale on your website, and try to pretend that other people that want that mini skirt, they don't get it.
Right. Which is crazy because Paloma looks amazing in that mini skirt. So it's crazy that if they can see that she looks amazing in it, why don't they make it for the masses? Yeah, it is crazy. But I don't know.
Thank you.
Thanks.
If there are no more questions, we will leave it here. We will thank you very much for walking successfully on this thin line between art and fashion and activism, in a way, no? And also being beautiful and disturbing at the same time. I want to thank, this is why you're here. I want to thank La Tèrmica and Thyssen for hosting us. And I want to let you know that on the 20th of May, we're celebrating our third edition of Fashion Meets Malaga in La Tèrmica, which is going to be a full day. 2 documentaries, very interesting ones, about Margiela and the disappearance of my mother, followed by 2 round tables and then 1 interview. And there's food trucks and a DJ, so we're going to have fun.
Oh my gosh. When is it?
20th of May.
I wish.
Well, maybe we'll see you there. We don't
Maybe.
know. Well, I'll see
you see a bow in the crowd. Yeah.
Okay, well, see you soon, and thank you very much for coming. Thank you, Michaela.
Thank you.